Shortly after I published my LA Comic Con video, I found Swell Entertainment's LA Comic Con video for 2023, and in it she implied that she thought New York, LA, and San Diego Comic Cons were all the same company, and didn't quite know why LA Comic Con didn't have any like major releases or anything when San Diego and New York did. So I'm going to explain that to you. Welcome back to Girl at the Con.
But it's like, at a certain point when you have so much variety, you have nothing. You know, like there's no substance to anything. And the complaint that I heard from my friend who has been to a couple Comic-Cons as well, dresses up constantly and all this stuff for these things, she said, yeah, it sucks because like New York Comic-Con and San Diego Comic-Con, things get announced. Nothing gets announced here. Basically in that, like, there's a trailer drop, there's a new project announced, things like that. It's kind of partly lacking from LA Comic-Con, it seems, at least in its current form. And that's why I say, like, do we actually need LA Comic-Con? Because the other thing that I heard from a lot of vendors that recognize my content and were like, oh yeah, like, let's talk about these things. The phrase that gets thrown around a lot is that LA Comic-Con doesn't really have an identity. It's a bit of an identity crisis. Yeah, what is kind of the purpose of LA Comic-Con? You can't really say, oh, we want a West Coast Comic-Con. You have San Diego Comic-Con. San Diego is 2 hours away. It's not far enough away where it's like, it really justifies having an LA Comic-Con, if that makes sense.
This is not the first time that I've come across somebody who thinks that all Comic Cons are the same Comic Con. It's very common and very easy to make that association because so many conventions outside of the fandom industry are conventions that, if they have the same name, are probably the same convention and they move. So I've been to dental conventions, for example, that are in San Diego one year, Florida the next year, maybe Vegas after that. They move around every so often because the same people go every year and they don't want to go to the same place every year. Which makes sense to me. Fandom conventions are not like that. They have a tendency to be in a place, and that's their place. And their name will reflect that. New York Comic Con is always in New York. LA Comic Con is always in LA. San Diego Comic Con is always in San Diego, except most people know San Diego Comic Con is Comic Con, period. Just Comic Con. We're going to discuss that. Now, Comic Con term just means comic book convention. It causes a lot of brand confusion, as I've mentioned, because so many people put it in the name of their convention. Because it causes brand confusion, there's a want to sort of trademark or copyright the term. I know that Comic Con kind of went through a legal battle doing this, and we will get to that. Put a pin in it, we're going to circle around. But let's talk about the three different conventions that we're talking about. First up, we're going to talk about LA Comic Con. It has kind of an interesting backstory to it, which I think is all it's really got going for it, but you can see my review in the doobly-doo below or in the card above if I can figure out how to make that work. LA Comic Con was started back in 2011 by Regina Carpinelli. Tell me how I said that wrong in the comments. And her two brothers. After she moved to LA, she decided that LA needed a large style convention like Comic-Con in San Diego. So she created Comikaze. Now, the next year in 2012, Stan Lee and Cassandra Peterson, better known as Elvira, we love Elvira, formed a partnership with Comikaze. They had started a production company and partnered up with Comikaze, and it got renamed Stan Lee's Comikaze. And then in 2016, they renamed it again to Stan Lee's LA Comic Con. Okay? After Stan Lee died, they took his name off it and it just became LA Comic Con. It's a reasonable size. Now, I am showing, based on Wikipedia, that it has 100,000 people in attendance. I don't know about that. I did not see 100,000 people there. I maybe saw 20 or 30,000, maybe. But I also, only went up, on a Friday? Yeah, I think I only went up on Friday. I didn't go up the full weekend. I could definitely be wrong. There is a practice for some conventions to get up to that 100K, 100 plus K number to count individuals each day as attendees and then add that together, as opposed to doing like an overall ticket count. You can also get into some other wonky ways of counting tickets and badges and all of that to get up to these like really high numbers. Put a pin in that, we'll come back to it. I don't know. I'm not going to make a comment on whether or not they're doing that. I just know that I did not see anywhere close to like 100,000 people at that convention. Next we have New York Comic Con, and it is run by ReedPop, which is a for-profit company, which is a distinction. I think LA Comic Con is also run by a for-profit company, but put a pin in that, we'll also come back to that. The parent company mostly does conventions for aeronautics, oceanography, dental, whatever. They typically do conventions like that. Now, from my limited research on Wikipedia, it would appear the ReedPop division was started with New York Comic Con. The VP, or former VP, Greg Topalan, he saw that New York had a lot of like comic book conventions, but didn't have like a big one. So he decided to kind of spin off a subdivision of the larger company and do New York Comic Con. That division has since grown. The ReedPop has since grown. And they put on things like C2E2 and PAX and stuff like that. If you don't know what those are, look them up. They are some very interesting sort of conventions. The first one was held in 2006, and it turned out to be much larger than they expected. They had a bunch of walk-in sales. Typically, if a convention is going to randomly explode and be much larger than anybody expected, tends to be because a bunch of people have just walked up and bought tickets. They don't buy tickets ahead of time, they just show up and buy tickets. And that can cause a convention to go from really tiny to really large in just a matter of hours. According to the Wikipedia page, the fire marshal in the first year shut down the convention because they had 10,000 people in the hall on Friday, when the hall was not set up for that. That, I think, really speaks volumes about New York Comic Con and the need for a large-scale New York convention. Very proud of them. Super awesome. And it's just gotten bigger and bigger every year after that. It's pretty large now. I don't know if I 100% trust their attendee thing again, the way I don't know if I trust LA's, because based on what I have seen of the size of the New York Convention Center and the number of people they have attending, I don't know if you can fit the number that they claim into that. And there have been rumors for years that New York Comic Con is inflating their numbers by doing some wonky counting, by counting people that most people would not count, such as convention center employees, security, stuff like that. Like the people you would not be like, oh, this person is attending the convention. Certainly when I'm at Comic-Con, I don't look at the maintenance crews and be like, that counts towards Comic-Con's overall number. I would not do that. But it's possible that Reed Pop and New York Comic Con are doing that. These are all rumors. Take them with a grain of salt. I don't know if I 100% trust their numbers, but I don't know if I 100% trust the fact that they're going around counting maintenance crews and stuff like that. I don't know how they're coming up with their numbers. I don't work for them. All the pictures of New York Comic Con look super crowded and big, so it is quite possible that they really do have, you know, hundreds of thousands of people in a space that does not look like it could fit hundreds of thousands of people. So, like I said, just take all of that with a grain of salt. Inflating numbers is something that can be easily done. And when you're talking about the prestige of saying, oh, I have the largest convention or whatever, it becomes a desire for people to want to inflate those numbers and make everything seem like it is bigger and larger than it actually is. Now we have Comic-Con. I want to call it just Comic-Con because that's how I know it, but I believe it is Comic-Con International, San Diego. Comic-Con is been around for an epically long time. It was started in 1970. It was called Golden State Comic Mini Con. That is a mouthful. Most people that I have talked to, most signage and stuff that talks about it, like at the Comic-Con Museum and stuff, says Golden State Comic Con, period. Over the decades, it has gotten larger and larger. It has changed its name a couple of times till we have what we have today, which is, like I said, Comic-Con International, San Diego. It has 140,000 people. They've kind of stopped announcing their numbers and recording their numbers where general people can get at them. I have no doubt that in their archives, in their filing type stuff that they keep to themselves, that they have that information, but they do not release it press-wise anymore because they don't want to get in fights, with other people who are like, oh no, but we have a larger convention, and yeah, they're just like, whatever. Which, props, don't fight other people. Just, if they want to be like, I have the largest whatever, then let them have the largest whatever. Who cares? Comic-Con is a non-profit convention. What they do and the money that they make goes back in to doing next year's convention, and then they donate money and they do other things that make them a non-profit. You can look all that up. I've never gone into it. I know that they do stuff with teaching and education, but I haven't ever really delved heavily into that. One of the other things about Comic-Con is the economic impact that it brings in to San Diego. I live in San Diego, and every year after the convention, we get like this estimated, like, this is how much Comic-Con brought into our city in tourism dollars and taxes and all of that. And it's something like 60% of our revenue. I could be off on that. I have graphics that came out after Comic-Con in 2024 that showed kind of what the economic impact of Comic-Con is on the city. I have no doubt that New York Comic Con probably does something similar or has something similar because they are so big. I don't know about LA because LA seems, well, they say 100K, it seems kind of small to me. So it is quite possible that they're bringing in much more local people, so they're not having as much of an impact as New York and San Diego probably have because they're bringing in people from out of state and from out of country to go to these conventions. In 2024, Comic-Con sued Salt Lake City Comic Con over trademark infringement. There's a lot of people who have a lot of feelings on this. Feel free to duke it out in the comments. I'm not taking a side. Except to say, how this started is kind of WTF. The year or a couple months before Comic-Con filed this lawsuit, during Comic-Con, Salt Lake City Comic-Con had a billboard truck that drove around downtown San Diego in the convention center area that advertised their convention. On an advertising standpoint, super smart. Love it. Like, get your bag. That's a great way to do it. Probably not the best idea, though, because I remember the billboard truck driving around, but I don't remember what it said. I just remember seeing it. Whatever it said, however it was, it implied that they were part of Comic-Con, or they gave the impression that they were part of Comic-Con, and that Salt Lake City was the next stop for Comic-Con, creating brand confusion because they implied that they were part of Comic-Con. The U.S. courts ruled in favor of Comic-Con and awarded them $20,000, albeit they did not consider the infringement to be willful. They think that while they did do it, they did infringe on Comic-Con's trademark. They think that it was really just an advertising thing and other people made that association, but that was not what Salt Lake was shooting for. I can see that. This has had a ripple effect, however, in that shortly after, a bunch of conventions changed their name. Phoenix changed their name to Fan Fusion, I believe, and Salt Lake Comic-Con renamed themselves Fan X Salt Lake Comic-Con, or Comic Convention. That's a name. These names, man, shorten it just a little bit. They also filed for a new trial in 2018. I can't find anything in my very, very limited search on whether or not that trial ever came to pass, or whether or not they dropped it, or they settled out of court with Comic-Con. I don't know. I did reach out to Comic-Con about it. Just all I had asked was, like, did this ever actually go through? If it didn't, why? At the time of this recording, they have not emailed me or returned any of my information for comment. If they do get back to me, I will leave something in the pinned comments or in the doobly-doo so that you guys can see that. That's where we stand with Comic-Con. There are many cons out there that still title themselves whatever Comic-Con or whatever comic convention. Comic-Con, even if they thought that they had trademark on it, they're not going after these people. Otherwise, New York Comic-Con and LA Comic-Con would have changed their names by now. I definitely think that there is some confusion on the larger ones, especially if you live in wherever you live. That Comic-Con, Comic-Con International, and New York Comic-Con are always going to be slightly confused, I think. Unless it's a Comic-Con in, rural Who Cares. Most people know that the rural Who Cares Comic-Con is not associated with Comic-Con International or New York Comic-Con. But I think on some of the larger cities, like Orlando or Minneapolis, there is that possibility of thinking that they are related in some way. Just be aware that not all conventions are the same conventions. I mean, if all Comic-Cons were the same Comic-Con, that would be an insanely huge company, because there is a Comic-Con everywhere, pretty much. Just something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you enjoyed this formative ride into the difference between Comic-Cons. I really appreciate everybody's support. I do have a Kofi if you want to tip me a couple dollars and start building up that fund so I can make it out to some conventions that are not in the Southern California area. If I can remember to post it, I also have socials that you can find down below as well. If you made it to this far in the video, please leave a comment, like, share, possibly subscribe if you're not already. That way I can just keep growing my channel and keep bringing you some interesting videos, I hope. You have a great day, and don't work too hard. Can you wave your hand again?
Yeah, I accept.